Hello, Larry, WD0AKX. A couple videos back in the list, I showed you a little bit about my DX-160 realistic shortwave receiver that I got, and I decided to do some modifications to it now and an alignment and that. So I'm just gonna take you through and show you some of the things I ended up doing with it as a short video update. First of all, I did end up doing a complete alignment on the radio as per the instruction manual or the service manual, and I found that online. But basically I went through each RF stage here. There's a section for each band, A, B, C, D, and E, that you use to align for signal strength and for calibration on the dial. And this radio was off a ways. Calibration was off on everything just a little, and that's kind of normal though. It's been sitting many years and it's an older radio, so things kind of tend to change. Component values change a little over time and all that. So it did need some aligning, and there's also an alignment procedure on the main board. So I went through, did that. The next thing I did was to add some LED lighting to the display. As you can see, I used some white LED strip lights, mounted them above the dial here, the indicator, and behind the S meter. And also I used some blue strip light LEDs mounted behind the band spread tuning. Now these lights are easy to find. I got mine off of Amazon, but pretty popular on the internet if you look around. And I got them real cheap. I got about a 16-foot section of white lighting for, I think it was about 12 bucks or so, $12, something like that. And I think shipping was even included when I got my blue ones for about $8. So if you look around, keep your eye out, you can get them cheap. Now they didn't have a power supply with them. They just came with the red and black wires attached, but I figured on hooking them up to my own 12 volts. But the nice thing about these lights, so you can cut them in any length you want and use them for different things. I use them all over in the shack and on the workbench here and other places. They're very bright. I used just 3 of them behind the S meter here, and it really lights up nice and bright. I'll show you. I'll turn the lights off here in a little bit so you can see that. I'll get in a little closer here. They're kind of bright for the camera, but they have an adhesive backing, and you can just stick them on wherever you want, wherever's a good place. And there's down underneath the S meter. And my other white lights are back up under this ridge here to light up the dial. Now the internal dial light that powers with AC is still, the lamps are still on the radio. So if I want it to power up as normal lighting, it does so when I power it up with 120 volts AC. So I just have these lights hooked up to DC, and I plan on running this radio on my DC power supply most of the time. Now up above there, above my bench, you can see a row of those LED lights. Right up here, I just stick under there, and I have some on the other side of the bench, and I use them up in my shack on my console, and I use them up even higher on my bench here. You can see here, they don't probably show up real good on the camera, they're so bright. But this radio does have the stock lights in it. Now the LED lamps are very low current draw. Alright, another modification I did was to add a DC cable, and like I say, I'm going to be running this radio off a DC power supply probably most of the time anyhow. So I did add that, and instead of putting a fuse in line here, I went ahead and drilled a hole and installed a permanent fuse holder for the DC cable right in the chassis. And at the end of my DC cable, as you can probably imagine, I installed the Anderson power pole connector. Right now I have it hooked up to my watts up meter. The radio is sitting there drawing about 100 milliamps at 12.11 volts with the LED lights on. So here is my 12 volt input to the radio, 12 volt fuse holder. Now another addition, I added a 3.5 millimeter audio plug, a smaller audio jack, because a lot of my speakers have this size plug on them, so I can plug in there. The stock speaker that came with the radio is a 1/4 inch plug, and that's made to plug in there. It's more like a headphone type connector. So I went ahead and added a smaller jack so I could use either option. They're both in parallel here, so I can connect to either one I want. Not both at the same time, just one or the other. And then the standard AC fuse is in the back of the radio. That was already there. Now another thing I did was to add an external antenna connector, a BNC connector. I thought about adding an SO239. I didn't have a punch or a drill bit big enough, and I didn't have one in stock here right now, so I went ahead and put a BNC connector. I have the right adapters I need if I want to adapt over to anything. So I can either use the wire connections for antenna, or I can use a BNC connector. That'll come in very handy. That's what I'll probably be using. Alright, here's looking from the underside of the radio at the BNC antenna connector. Just grounded the chassis, and I just tapped it off of one of the antenna points here. And I've tried that. It works just fine. And over a little farther here is where I added my 12 volt fuse holder and my 12 volt lighting wires for the LED lights off of 12 volts. And my audio jack is down in here. Just tapped off the main audio jack for that. This is some of the alignment coils that I had to go through for each band to align things, and it really did improve things. Another thing I did was to go through and use some spray cleaner on my potentiometer controls, and there's some bearings for some of the controls here that use variable capacitors, so I lubricated those bearings also that are on those. Makes them feel a little smoother now. Another thing I did, there was a couple scratches on the faceplate here in the plastic, some nice scratches. They weren't very deep, so I used some Novus number 2 and put it on there like wax, and did that a few times and buffed it out, and the scratches are now pretty much gone. You have to look real close to find any trace of scratches. And last but not least, I guess, this is the audio amp section in the radio here, and there's some modifications, changing out some capacitors that I found online. I can put a link to where I got a lot of this information and found service manual and all that below the video here, or in the video description if you see that on the page. But anyhow, there's several capacitors here. Most of them, I guess, electrolytic capacitors that I changed out to kind of get rid of that nasally sound. The radio isn't known for high quality sound, I guess, the audio, so that did help. It still isn't the best sound, but it's you know, it's communications type sound, but I want to go for just a little bit more of a bassier low end sound, get a little bit of lows out of it, and maybe a few more highs. And this kind of opened up the frequency response on this audio amp, so it does sound a little better. It kind of took that nasally sound out of the audio. These are the capacitors I ended up changing out. The C54, it was a 1 microfarad, and I put a 22 microfarad in there. And C56, I changed out to a 220 microfarad. It was a 33 microfarad. C58, I changed to a 10 microfarad. It was a 0.1 microfarad disc capacitor. C63, 1000 microfarad. I don't remember what that was, but I put 1000 microfarad in there. C64, I just lifted it out of the circuit. There's C64. Just lifted it out of the circuit, and I left it there in place in case I ever want to replace it for some reason. Alright, there's what the radio looks like with the LED lighting and 12 volt DC hookup. And there's the classic view, the way the radio originally came stock. And that's plugged into 120 volt AC now.
Presenta la oportunidad, el derecho, esa historia nueva que...
At the tone, 3 hours, 8 minutes, coordinated universal time. Storm will be continued. 2014.
That big, he said that was just, they had a head like a lion. Big dogs. Can you imagine a dog, 300 pounds?
Ready to go back in service.
At the tone, 3 hours, 30 minutes, coordinated universal time.
7.3 from WD0AKX and KPC0AKX, my PopCom monitoring station ID.